Hello, Turtles! We have all heard the phrase, time is money, and when approaching games as a business, it is critical to understand this fact. After this video, you will understand what time cost is all about, how to calculate the cost of your time, and why tracking this cost is seriously important for business in games. I have worked in the game industry for more than 5 years before jumping into software for the stability. That has allowed me to start my own business in making racing games. The cost of development for a game includes the expenses and the cost of time. As a developer, it is easy to forget to consider that time is an actual cost to your project because you don't necessarily spend money on it directly. Some will compare the income they receive from a full-time salary against the income made from their game sales. This is an opportunity cost and not to be confused with time cost. These are two very different things. Opportunity cost is useful for determining if an adventure in making games as a business is worth it to you. In 2009, I went on a 2,000-mile hiking adventure over the course of 6 months. Let us pretend I was making $100,000 a year at the time.
He wasn't.
I planned to have no income for 9 months to cover the time hiking and finding a job afterwards. This would be an opportunity cost of $75,000. Though not taking the hike would also have an opportunity cost, missing out in life experiences. At the time, I had student loans and needed to eat, both of which were more tangible costs as money flew out of the accounts. This cost would have been spent either on the trail or with a job, and represents something more related to time cost as we will dig into soon. When making major choices, the opportunity cost is a great way to compare the two possible situations and paths in life. It is not always strictly financial. Experiences and enjoyment come into play as well. This, however, is where usefulness stops, as it is not a cost related to developing your game. So then, what exactly is time cost? Time cost is the amount of money it takes to live the lifestyle you wish to maintain. For some people, living in a tent while hail falls from the sky is bliss. And for others, a huge house with the greenest grass and a fancy car is the minimum expectation. Whatever lifestyle you live, you'll have money going out to support it. Hopefully more. This is money that gets spent regardless of your work or income situation. However, if you expect that fancy house and car lifestyle, you should remain very cautious about starting a business in games. A business in games is prone to extreme risk. There is a very large chance of failure. For all the games you see doing well, many more go unseen that failed spectacularly in the financial sense. Even on Steam, there are plenty of otherwise great games that did not make enough sales to cover the expenses and time cost of the developer or team. This doesn't even count the number of developers that started and failed to get their product released. I can't recall where, but I have heard that 95% of those attempting games as a business fail. And I believe it. Be prepared for failure. Have an exit plan, and be responsible. The risks increase with expectations of more costly lifestyles. Use market research and business planning to ensure you have confidence that it is possible to keep your expectations. If not, something must change. This will likely be the topic of another video.
Subscribe now for more tips.
In a moment, we will discuss how to compute the cost of your time as a business in games and why you will want to track this. There are many benefits from understanding this value, so stay tuned. January 2020 was one of the most ambitious months goal-wise that I have ever pushed myself towards as a developer and a person. I tried a variety of things based on my 2020 goals. I spent 6 hours doing typing practice to improve my typing speed. I am still slower at proper home row finger placement than I am with my wild fingers, though I see potential for more efficiency once muscle memory is retrained. Another challenge was to bring the development log back to life and provide more value to other developers. The first video was an overview of my entire adventure so far and sharing the lessons I have learned along the way. Check it out if you haven't already. That video took 23 hours to produce, which had a time cost of over $350. For my quest in making racing games as a business, I did some market research. There were over 200 racing games released on Steam in 2019. I collected the data of all these games to check out how plausible my adventure would be. Many of these games did not do well financially, as far as I can tell, though this is somewhat expected when 95% of games as a business do not succeed. I have shared all this research data on Patreon.
Link is in the description below.
More specific to Turbo Boom was the objective to complete all the levels in the game. This has been nearly accomplished. I do need to wrap up a few additional levels, but the initial push was solid. I had been struggling with level development since late September, and even took a break from the project for a couple months to avoid creating uninspired levels. However, in January I got back in the driver's seat and got the momentum that carried the level development forward. This included reordering all the levels by a rough difficulty score, and in this process, I found it extremely hard rating the difficulty of each level. On one hand, the difficulty could be rated by just completing the level, and on the other, completing it quickly, which is usually much harder. After wrapping up the level work, I held a playtest where I learned the difficulty curve needs a few adjustments later in the game. The levels and ordering will get revisited before launch, but it certainly remains a development challenge for me. A total of 111 hours were tracked creating levels on my game, which has a time cost of $1,800. From a business perspective, this would need to be returned via sales once launched. I do have a full-time job, so I'm not dependent on that for success. However, the goal is to get there someday. A business must cover all the costs it have, expenses or time. In January, over 150 hours were tracked with a time cost for my business of over $2,600 in total. Knowing this gives me multiple advantages, which will be covered in a moment. Before that, let us go over how to figure out that cost for your situation. The first thing you do is add up all your bills and things you spend money on. I did this by looking at the totals going out of my bank account each month for the past many years. For me, that was averaging about $1,300 a month. Your situation probably varies. Health insurance, however, is mostly covered by having a full-time job, and that would increase my spending rate. This is a bit of a guess, but I tossed in $200 a month for that. Consider things like retirement funds and other long-term planning as well. This is also time to add in other things you expect to need for a business you're starting. Hardware and upgrades, lawyers and accountants, hiring contractors, publishing fees, or anything else. I optimistically used $3,000 a year, based strictly on tripling what I was spending on hardware upgrades in the past. This is not a good figure, and I need to adjust it for myself as I have learned it will cost much more in reality. Do take your time to estimate these costs the best you can. When you have all the numbers, it is fairly straightforward to work out exactly how much you need after taxes and other cuts take money away. For my current situation, the lowest possible cost per year is $21,000 after taxes. Using a conservative rate of 35% for taxes, that means I need game sales to cover $32,000 a year after publisher and marketplace cuts. Breaking this down further, you can get your cost per month or week. However, I did find it best to break it down to an hourly rate. Mind you, this rate is very, very different than the rate I or you would charge somebody to do work for them. Breaking this time cost into an hourly rate does get a little more fiddly, as you can't possibly work for 24 hours a day, nor will you likely work a fixed number of hours. So doing a pure time division like you can with months or weeks doesn't quite work here. The number I like to use is the ideal working numbers. For a small business, it is almost certain that more hours will be spent than a typical 40-hour work week, especially to get started. For ideal hours, I am targeting the 40-hour work week for 50 weeks a year. For you, this might be lower or higher. Remember, this is an ideal target to aim for, not necessarily the actual hours spent. In the background, you've seen a small section of my Indie Career Tracker. It contains a small calculator that outputs your time cost, as well as tracking your time and organizing your business. There is a free version to try out, though an updated one is available for Patreon supporters that combines multiple years of your adventure data super easily. Here, you see my inputs and ideal working hours winds up with a time cost of just over $16 an hour. Again, I want to stress, this is not the hourly rate I would charge to do work for a client.
And you shouldn't either.
Now that you understand what time cost is, and perhaps even calculated your own cost per hour, here are a few reasons to track your time. Earlier, in discussing what time cost is, I mentioned determining if your business plans are sustainable for the living costs you have. It goes further by keeping you accountable for your efforts and decisions. There is a high chance of financial failure approaching the business by making your dream project without consideration of the development costs. By adding all the content and features you wish along the way, it becomes unlikely to be sustainable. For a better chance of success, some hard decisions must be made. What subset of features should your efforts be focused on, and which should be dropped? Yes, ideas need to be prioritized and some features will need to be cut from every project. Which ones? In Turbo Boom, I was adding cannons and rocket launchers as new dynamic obstacles. It was a feature that I anticipated would add a fair amount of value and take very little time.
He was wrong.
The cannons and launchers absolutely provide some unique, fun obstacles. However, the development time exploded to make that happen. Cannonballs presented issues with the physics system, and rockets required a lot more iteration. They were initially planned as homing rockets. In total, 30 hours were spent on developing these features when 10 hours were expected. The value add is still worth the time cost, but at $500 I was definitely attentive and considering dropping the features. Another major advantage to tracking your time and the cost is knowing when it would be better to hire help. It may be a little counterintuitive, but sometimes spending money on contracts actually saves you money in the long run. It does this by freeing up your time from that task to focus elsewhere. On top of that, it may produce better results if the person you hire has stronger skills. Hiring a contract is a complex topic that could fill several videos. Here I'm going to simplify the process greatly to show how your time cost relates to these decisions. Feel free to discuss this in the comments below.
Or tweet instead.
Pretend you need models for a level in your game. You have estimated it is going to take you 60 hours to complete the task. The task is required to ship the game. Using my time cost of $16 an hour, that would be almost $1,000 to do them yourself. If someone else was charging $500 to $600 because they could do it faster, it would almost certainly be a good choice to hire it out. Even with the communication overhead, the task would likely cost less to complete. This can be hard to think about as saving money. The work needs to be done no matter who does it or how it gets done. If the price of the hired contractor costs less than the time costs you were capable of, the task is done for less money. This lowers the cost of producing your game. It also benefits in speeding up development as it freed you to work on something else. Just a reminder, my indie career tracker is freely available, which makes your life easier. This tracker has allowed me to make better business decisions, like when I put Rally of Rockets on hold. This video went a little longer than I expected, but we covered a lot about a very important topic that may get overlooked. Time cost is the amount of money spent maintaining your lifestyle while developing the game. Computing your time cost per hour is a little fiddly since working hours are rarely consistent for a small business. Finally, knowing about your costs allows you to determine if a business in games is even possible, use contractors as a way to save money, and determine the cost to value ratio of features. Be sure to like if you did, comment if I missed something, and subscribe for future updates and tips about running a game development business. Until later, have a good one. Nailed it!